I'm going to read to you from the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. I'm going to read chapter 1, actually. I'm not going to read the whole book. I'll explain some more of the whole book in due course. Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. After they'd lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons, without her 2 sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." And she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who would become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And Naomi, the woman exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she said. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. "Because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." And so Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. This is God's word. And so today, I want to make a point. I think this book is called Ruth. There's no rhyme or reason. Well, there usually is rhyme or reason to the naming of books. But the name of book isn't a part of the scriptural witness. It's usually something that comes from history or convention. I want to put it to you that one of the main characters that the Lord speaks to us through in this book of Ruth is actually Naomi. And I want to put it to you furthermore that she is a good model for us in a world that's a little bit crazy, in a world where a lot of the world around us doesn't follow the Lord. She's a good model for us, but not totally. I think we should be like Naomi, but not completely. Let me explain all that. So the book of Ruth is set during the fairly dark days of the book of Judges. If you remember the book of Judges, It's a time just after Israel had left the promised land, had gone from Egypt, they'd got into the promised land, they'd gone from Egypt, they'd finally got in there, they'd conquered Canaan. They went into Canaan, they conquered it with God's help, and they were supposed to, of course, live according to God's laws and to worship Him and worship Him only, but they didn't. And their pattern of worship and living was to forget about God and to follow other gods and live as they saw fit and not follow the Lord or worship Him properly. And they did that, and what would happen was the Lord would give them over. That's the phrase He uses. They would basically start following the ways of the other gods that they were following, and things would get very bad for them. And they get so bad that eventually they'd start calling out to God again, and God would send a judge. 12 of them in total. And 12 times the judge would come and he would make basically everything good. And 12 times they forgot again what the Lord had taught them, and their society went back to some hard times. And there was, of course, individual Israelites who loved and worshipped God, and they also lived trying to follow God's law and doing their best to remain obedient to God in those dark times. But by far, it seems that there was just this general spiritual malaise that covered the land of Israel. It is a little bit of an exaggeration to say it's like Ireland today. I don't think it's quite there, to be fair. But it's not too far off. The Catholic Bishop of Derry said this during the week. You tell me, do you agree with this? He said, he was opening up a Christian bookshop, actually. And he was talking about the state of the Ireland. And he said that Ireland is wallowing in despair and meaninglessness. Do you agree with this? You think that's right? You're kind of hemming and hawing, I think. That's what he said. Now, it's true, isn't it, that Ireland is changing. Christendom, we were part of it. It is dying a death. Laws which reflected Christian roots are slowly being removed, are changed, are blunted. Even after the most recent constitutional referendum, which was soundly defeated, I didn't see anything from the Irish government that would approach trying to bring laws that looked like what the country wanted after that election. Nothing has changed, in fact. And speaking of the Constitution, too, there is a recommendation that the preamble, which says, in the name of the most holy Trinity, from whom all authority and to whom, as our final end, all actions, both of men and states, must be referred. That is the opening line, the preamble of our Constitution. And there's a recommendation that is taken away. I wonder actually if it will be when time comes. But ultimately, whatever is going on, when the state of a country goes down, or when its laws start to not reflect the law of God, or praise for God, or love for God, that is the result of people and nations attempting to move away from Him, or wanting nothing or little to do with Him, or not wanting to even think of Him any longer. I find actually that most Irish people, in my experience, they either have a sense, they do have a sense that they're not doing that good in the eyes of God, but, and you will have heard this, they'll say, I'm not doing too bad either. And it's like it acts as a buffer against really considering the claims of God. I have to anonymize these things, but I was talking to some people recently, and it was very clear they just had no sense either of any idea that God might have something good for them, but also absolutely zero fear of Him or any sense that they might have to come before Him one day. Nothing. There's no sense, I find, that there's no sense in a lot of people that they're going to stand before the Lord one day. They're going to have to give an account for how we've lived. There's no sense that He might have something better for them. That actually following God, being touched by His love and knowing His love, that even that language is outside of the frame for a lot of people. That the Lord might love them. As I said, we don't quite live in times like Judges. They might be on the way. Who knows? I don't know. But either way, God always gives people over to their desires, giving them what they seek. In which case, if the people of Ireland continue to reject God and continue to reject Jesus and continue to reject his love, then Judges and Ruth and times like that will come. And the stories contained in there won't be so odd to us even today. So anyway, why am I talking about that? Well, I want us to think about these things through the lens of Naomi. See, the times were spiritually tough. There were blessings for some people who had not cast off God, yes. But because of that overall spiritual void, though, I think it is understandable, if not agreeable, that as we see in here back in chapter 1 and verse 13, Naomi, she felt completely abandoned by God after her husband died. And then her 2 grown married sons also died, leaving her and her 2 daughter-in-laws widows. And she says she believes that God's hand was against her because of the deaths of these men. And if you don't have good spiritual input, sometimes it's easy to believe lies about the Lord, isn't it? She says, the Lord's hand is against me. And certainly he could have been trying to teach her something. But we have a patient and a merciful God. That's not the first place I would go to. And certainly not when considering the death of someone that you love. But so often isn't it true that when things go bad, the first thing that we have is, why me, Lord? What are you doing to me? And of course, there is a place for asking the Lord, what are you doing? Why has this happened? But I think that place is called lamenting. And it's a good place. It's a biblical place. A godly weeping over loss. And I know all of you have lost things and people. Death is a curse. And we're not meant to live in a world of loss and pain. Remember, the Lord wept 3 times. He's recorded as having cried 3 times. Once over Jerusalem and its lack of faith. Do you cry over Ireland? Have you ever cried over this nation of ours? His island? And his people? And their lack of faith? And the second time he cried over the death of his friend Lazarus. And I know I've cried. I've seen many of you cry over people that you care about that have died. And then lastly, of course, in Hebrews, he's recorded as having cried over his coming death. It's right to weep over loss and what is not good in this world. It's right to be sad about those things. But to ask God or to complain about God, to God, about the outcomes that he gives us, we have no right to give out to God. It's hard not to. I understand. But if we are his servants, and our prayer then always should be, Lord, help me carry this cross. Comfort me, please, Lord. Give me the grace I need to carry this cross, to be obedient, and to have faith, even now, in the middle of this. Give me the friends and the family that will help me walk on this path that you've put me on. Draw close to me, Father. And so I think there are positive things to say about Naomi from this chapter. But her complaining here in the end at the chapter as well, where she talks about how bitter she is, speaks not all is well with Naomi. Now it could be, I should say for completeness, it could be when stuff happens, it could be that the Lord is disciplining you. The trouble in your life is God's way of telling you there is a problem, and that problem is you. And you should ask him that too. Or better yet, when something happens, just take an honest inventory of your own life. Or even better, because it's very hard for us to be honest about ourselves sometimes, ask someone that you trust to give an honest appraisal of your life. That outside perspective is a good one to get. And I think I've said this before, but every now and then, if you're married, or if you have someone in your life that you trust, if you're not married, you should ask them, if there was one thing you'd change about me, what would it be? Ask that question. And see where the conversation goes. If you're a Christian, it's hard to get hard news. But it's always good to get hard news. Either way, folks, times were tough. The land was hard. Faith was rare. And Naomi, with her two daughters-in-law, they head back from the country of Moab to Israel. And Naomi wanted to go back to Israel because she had heard that God was providing food for people there. Remember, the first reason she left because there was a famine. And the fields were once again producing grain and other crops. And Naomi probably knew, and she didn't have any land of her own, remember. She probably knew that the law of God in Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 and 10, said that a farmer should leave some of the crops in their fields so that people passing by could help themselves if they were hungry. And Naomi knew that if God was indeed blessing the people of Israel with good crops, there would be excess left in the fields for gleaning. And so this is one of the places we see that she has good character because she is humble. Tough times call for desperate measures. And so whatever else you could say about her, you couldn't say she was too proud to refuse a lowly way of living. She didn't want, however, either daughter-in-law to go with her. Probably she didn't see a way of providing for them. She spends a lot of time saying that she can't provide a man for them. She wouldn't have any more children herself. And both of her daughter-in-laws were from Moab, so it was somewhat natural that she wanted them to remain there for better chances to find a husband, to find a place to stay. But we'll come back to that. There's a problem with that. Now, one of them did stay there, but Ruth did not. And Ruth's words and her dedication and commitment so moved Naomi that Naomi relented and allowed her to remain with her. And I think actually Naomi did love Ruth. I think we see that in the rest of the story. She didn't want Ruth to be alone. She tried to get her a man. She got her Boaz. Now, some say, of course, that this whole book really is focused on Ruth. And indeed, if you go to the end, you see that Ruth has a child, and that child becomes a descendant of David, who eventually is one of the ancestors of Jesus. And even here in this chapter, even though we don't hear too much about her, Ruth shines, doesn't she? She displays a loyalty here that's like is rare. And her words have inspired wedding vows for millennia. Did anybody in their wedding vows use verse 16 here? Anybody here? No? Let me quote it to you. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And to this day, that's quoted on weddings all over the world, certainly in Jewish weddings. And indeed, to leave not just your people, but your gods, your country, and even the protection provided by husbands in a very patriarchal times, to leave all that and to go with Naomi, that is a testament to something really special within Ruth, isn't it? Was it the Spirit of God? Was it a deep respect for Naomi because of her great character? We're not told, but she's clearly a woman of some spine. If I was a single man myself, if I was Boaz, I would marry her too. I mean, I have my own Ruth. I'm doing all right. She's a good woman. She's a great woman, Ruth is. And there is some who who do say, like I say, I'm not 100% sure about this, but there's some who say actually the story of Ruth is kind of like it misses the point, that this is really all about Naomi. And if you read the rest of the book, what happens is Naomi starts off in this chapter, we've just seen it, and she's bitter. And she's saying some odd things, we'll come to that in a second. But at the end of the book, she's delighted because she has, and there's a picture of her as a grandmother holding her new grandchild. And she's saying how blessed she is. And so it actually ends, the book ends focused on Naomi. And there's some commentators who say that the whole book is there as a way of showing how the power of people can actually heal people of their bitterness. I'm not so sure about that. But Naomi, whatever about happens to her in the end of the book, here we see that she's a good woman, but she herself is a flawed lady. At the very start there in the first couple of verses, you see firstly, herself and her husband allowed her 2 sons to marry women from nations that followed false gods. And God was very, very, very clear that his people should not intermarry with those from different religions, the pagan religions. And so Naomi does have some issues from the get-go. Although she has shown herself in some ways to be tough and gracious and humble, she's got knowledge of God and his law. I mean, would that all of the women and men in our congregation were like that. But despite her clear good characteristics, she did allow her sons to intermarry across religions, or pagan religions. And she shows something similar when she commended both of her daughters. In verse 15, she said to both of her daughters-in-law to go back to their gods. I would never say that about my children. I couldn't do that. And she shouldn't have done that either. She said, to quote her, your sister-in-law, she said this to Ruth, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go you back with her. Moab, of course, where they just come from, was one of the old enemies of Israel, who had shown no kindness to the Israelites in their journey to Canaan. And they are a constant problem throughout the Old Testament, and their gods reflect their evil character. Some of their gods were despicable, and that's why I'm reluctant to say that Ireland today is like the time of Judges, because some of the things they were doing then were truly despicable. And if Naomi really knew the law of God, I don't think she'd be suggesting that. The Lord had actually told the Israelites that they should live in such a way that the nations around them would marvel. Let me quote you Deuteronomy 4:6. He's talking about the law of God. He says, keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. And so the Israelites knew that as a nation, they were to live, as it were, in front of the other nations. They were to be Yahweh-focused, monotheistic, dedicated to the one true God. They were to worship him and him alone. And they were to follow his ways and not the ways of the surrounding nations. And they were never, it must be said, they were never told that they were to go to the nations. They didn't have the missionary edge that the church today does, but they were certainly never allowed to praise the false gods of the surrounding nations or talk positively about them. And you might think I'm being a bit harsh on Naomi, but allowing these 2 women to go to their God appears to me to be a fundamental failure of godly living in ungodly times. We live in unbelieving or ungodly times. I know, folks, this is really what I've come to today. I know that the pressure to give in, to go with the flow, to not resist is hard. And so I say to you, let us take the example of Naomi insofar as it inspires obedience to God and his law, but to reject the temptation to give 1 little inch to pluralism, to soft peddling with the false gods of our age, and to the false worship and false notions that surround us. You should be like Naomi. but not totally. She got some things right, but she didn't get it all right. And of course, to do that, we don't look to Naomi, do we? We look to the Lord. We take his example. He was gentle and lowly in spirit, and yet he was fierce in his dedication to following the path of God. It was pointed out to me actually recently, when it comes to talking to people, we can't be harsh. The followers of the Lord can never be harsh. We're called to be gentle. Someone said to me actually recently that if a pastor is not gentle, he's not fit to be a pastor. I tell you, that give me some pause. But it was also pointed out to me recently that Jesus, he's gentle in his speech, but not all the time. And if you look at his 3 years of ministry, what does he do at the start? He starts off, he's got the Sermon on the Mount, he's saying, blessed are this, blessed are that. He's telling parables. He's engaging with the crowds. And then very near the end of his ministry, if you look at Matthew chapter 23, we see some of his most strident language when he says, woe to you hypocrites. Woe, 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 woe. You brood of snakes, he says to the Pharisees. And he'd been engaging with them for 3 years. And he didn't bring out that language until the end. Maybe Matthew 11, there's one little woe. But this is full on, wasn't it? So we take the example of the Lord to be gentle and only strident after a long time, I think. We take the example of the Lord who argued for all of the law and obedience to all of it. But he did discriminate. He did talk about the Sabbath, and he talked about things like tithing. But he said, don't ignore that, but you are to major on the major parts of judgment, faith, and mercy. And we're to take the example of the Lord to worship God and God only. And as I said before, not give 1 inch. He never gave 1 inch to even entertaining worship of anything else other than the Lord. That's our example. And of course, we look to the Lord for grace in every bit of that, because we're not living in Judges-like times, but we are living in hard times, and we need a lot of grace because the pressure is there all the time, isn't it? I'll leave you with this story. I read a story recently of a 91-year-old man, a husband and wife, actually, who were speaking with our pastor. And I spoke to this pastor. I've read this story, and I've spoken to the actual pastor himself. And this couple were thinking of dying. They're 91. And they called the pastor, and they told him that they were seeking forgiveness. They had been making amends for different things, these kind of things. And the husband said, I'm ready to go home to see my Lord. Right? And the pastor asked him, he said, did you feel this readiness to die when you were my age? I think the pastor, if I know him right, maybe about in his 50s at this time. And the elderly gentleman said, definitely not. I couldn't have spoken like this then. I was too cluttered up. My career, the kids, I would have been afraid to talk like this back then. But he says, Christ can change you. And he said, you can love as an old man in a way you didn't even understand when you were younger. Folks, I think many of us have got cluttered by this modern Ireland of ours. Put it aside. With the help of the Lord, from answer to your prayers, put it aside. Focus on him, his example, his grace. Return to the Lord, folks, to his word, to his law, and above all to his grace. We've been watched. And many who are similarly cluttered, they need to know too that they can be taught how to love the Lord, indeed how to love again. You know, one of the things that gets me the most in my, not pastoral ministry so much, but my evangelism, when I'm talking to people outside the church, and I think there's a certain age, and maybe it's about 30, 35, and after that, people seem to be convinced that there's no change in them. And yet I know the Lord of heaven. We've been reading about him all day. We read about him every Sunday. He's changing all of us. Who here is the same as they were 6 years ago when I first met you? I'm not the same. So it's not true. So Ireland is cluttered, and they need to know that they too can be taught how to love God and to love again, even themselves. And that they need to know that they can be changed by Christ. And who's going to tell them if we don't tell them? What life are they going to see it if they don't see it in our lives? But don't worry about your life. Do worry about it, but point them to Christ. Naomi was good, but Christ is better. Let's pray.